The hospital ship Hippocrates carried 412 people when it died. 390 of them were patients, evacuated from a border skirmish that had nothing to do with the Tessari Compact and everything to do with a mining dispute between two minor powers neither empire much cared about. The remaining 22 were medical staff, volunteers, and a single journalist documenting humanitarian operations along the contested frontier. The Hippocrates was marked according to every interstellar convention humanity had signed on to in its 5 years of galactic citizenship. Its hull carried the universal medical emblem in 3 different light spectrums, visible to any sensor suite built in the last century. Its transponder broadcast continuously on the designated humanitarian frequency. It carried no weapons, no military escort, and no cargo beyond medical supplies and the wounded it was ferrying to a treaty hospital station 2 systems away. At 0347 station time, a single precision strike from an unidentified vessel destroyed the Hippocrates in 11 seconds. There were no survivors. Director Amara Voss received the notification in her office at Earth Intelligence Command 4 hours later, the delay caused by the time it took the news to travel from the Frontier Relay Station to Earth through 3 separate communication hops. She read the initial report twice, the way she always did with anything involving casualties. The first pass for information, the second for what the information actually meant. Confirmed hostile strike, she said to her deputy, Commander Lu Wei, who had brought her the report in person rather than trusting it to a routine channel. Not debris, not a navigational hazard, not an accident of any kind that I can see in this preliminary data. The Tessari Compact has already issued a statement, Lu said, before we even released our own findings. They're calling it a tragic targeting error. One of their patrol vessels conducting routine border security mistook the Hippocrates for a smuggling vessel using a humanitarian transponder as cover. Voss set the report down slowly. That's a very specific story to have ready within 4 hours of an incident they claim was an accident. It gets more specific. They've already named the patrol captain responsible, relieved him of duty, and offered a formal apology along with reparations to any affected families, before identifying the victims, before we've even released the casualty list. Liu nodded. It's clean, Director. Almost too clean. Voss had spent 19 years in intelligence work before this posting, long enough to recognize the particular shape of a prepared narrative versus a genuine accident response. Genuine accidents produced confusion, contradictory initial reports, slow and halting official statements, while investigators tried to understand what had actually happened. This was something else. This was a story that had been written before the strike occurred, waiting only for the moment it could be released. Pull every sensor record we have from that sector, she said. Every relay station, every passing vessel, every satellite with line of sight to that strike. I want to know what actually happened before the Tessari finished telling the galaxy what they wanted to believe happened. The Tessari Compact controlled 6 border systems adjacent to human territory, a moderate regional power that had maintained careful, correct relations with Earth since first contact. Their public diplomatic posture toward humanity had always emphasized caution and mutual respect, the kind of relationship built on neither side wanting trouble with the other. Privately, within the Compact's military leadership, the relationship looked considerably different. Fleet Admiral Dressen Korlath had spent the better part of a decade arguing that human expansion into the border region represented a long-term strategic threat the Compact had been too slow to address. His arguments had found little traction with the Compact's civilian government, which valued the stability of correct relations with Earth over Korlath's warnings about a species he considered dangerously unpredictable. What the civilian government did not know, and what Korlath had carefully ensured remained unknown even to most of his own military command, was that he had spent the preceding 8 months identifying a method to slow human expansion that would not trigger the kind of direct confrontation his civilian superiors feared. Hospital ships moved predictably. They followed fixed humanitarian corridors, maintained transparent schedules for treaty compliance, and carried no escort because no escort had ever been necessary. They were, in the cold calculation Korlath had made and never spoken aloud to anyone outside a small circle of trusted officers, an efficient way to damage human medical capacity along the frontier while maintaining complete deniability through the appearance of an accident. The strike on the Hippocrates was not his first. It was his third, and the first two had gone entirely unquestioned, written off by Compact investigators, who were also Corliss subordinates, as unfortunate but plausible accidents. He had expected the same outcome from the third. He had not accounted for the possibility that humans might investigate an accident with the same intensity they would investigate an attack. 3 days after the Hippocrates was destroyed, Director Voss convened a briefing with President Amara Voss and the full Coalition Security Council. The room was tense in a way Voss had rarely experienced in her career, the particular stillness of people waiting to learn whether a tragedy was a tragedy or something worse. "What do we know?" Voss asked. "We know the Tessari's official account does not match the available evidence," Voss said, bringing up the first of several holographic displays. Their account describes a single patrol vessel acting alone, conducting routine border security, that mistook a clearly marked hospital ship for a smuggling vessel due to transponder malfunction on our end. And what does the evidence show? The strike that destroyed the Hippocrates required targeting precision inconsistent with a routine patrol vessel's standard weapon suite. We've cross-referenced the weapon signature against every Tessari vessel class in our database. It matches a specialized long-range precision platform used exclusively by Tessari Special Operations Command, not standard patrol forces. A murmur moved through the council. Additionally, Voss continued, a relay satellite with partial sensor coverage of the area recorded a secondary vessel maintaining position at extreme range from the strike location for approximately 40 minutes before the Hippocrates entered the area, consistent with a vessel waiting in ambush position rather than conducting routine patrol. Could this be a single rogue officer, someone acting outside Compact authority? Voss had asked herself the same question. It's possible. But Commander Liu's team identified 2 prior incidents in the same sector over the preceding 7 months, both involving humanitarian or civilian vessels, both written off by Compact investigators as accidents, both showing similar evidence of deliberate targeting that the investigating Compact officers either missed or chose not to pursue. President Voss absorbed this in silence for a long moment. "You're telling me this is a pattern. I'm telling you the evidence supports a pattern. And that pattern points toward a deliberate campaign rather than a series of unfortunate coincidences," Voss said. "Whether that campaign has official Compact sanction or represents a faction operating with partial autonomy, I cannot yet say with certainty. What do you recommend?" Voss had spent 3 sleepless days preparing for this exact question, and her answer reflected a deliberate choice she had made early in the investigation, one she knew would surprise a council more accustomed to thinking in terms of military response. "I recommend we do not retaliate," she said. "Not yet. I recommend we build a case so complete and so undeniable that the Tessari government itself and every other species watching this region has no path left to dismiss what happened as an unfortunate accident. I recommend we let the truth do what a fleet cannot." The investigation that followed consumed 6 weeks, and drew on resources from across human intelligence and scientific institutions, coordinated by Voss with a discipline that General Webb, watching from his liaison role with the Security Council, privately compared to the 90-day buildup that had preceded the New Meridian engagement years earlier. Different method, he noted to Voss during one briefing. Same patience. Forensic analysts reconstructed the Hippocrates' final 11 seconds from debris analysis, recovering enough of the ship's black box data to confirm the precise weapon signature, trajectory, and timing of the strike. Signals intelligence teams cross-referenced military communication intercepts from the sector, painstakingly decrypted over weeks of processing, that placed a Tessari Special Operations vessel in the strike zone at the exact time of the attack, despite official Compact records showing no Compact vessel registered in that location. Most critically, a junior Tessari communications technician named Vren Lassa, stationed at a relay outpost near the border, and increasingly troubled by inconsistencies he had noticed in traffic logs following the Hippocrates incident, reached out through a carefully secured channel established by human intelligence specifically for exactly this kind of contact. I don't know who else to tell this to. Lasse's message read, translated and verified by 3 separate linguistic analysts before Voss saw it. I processed a communication 6 hours before the Hippocrates was destroyed. A special operations vessel requesting confirmation of a target's transponder signature. The transponder ID it confirmed was the Hippocrates' registered frequency. I didn't understand what I was looking at until I saw the news. I have copies. I am afraid of what happens to me if anyone in my command structure learns I've sent this, but I cannot stay silent about 400 people. Voss read the message 3 times before bringing it to the Security Council. It was, she told President Bello, the piece that transformed a strong circumstantial case into something close to irrefutable. We need to protect this source, Bello said immediately. We're already working on extraction, Voss confirmed. He's requested asylum. Given what he's provided us, I believe we owe him considerably more caution than a standard intelligence asset would receive. Admiral Korlath learned of the leak 9 days after Lasse's initial contact through a routine internal security sweep that flagged unusual data access patterns at the border relay outpost. By the time Korlath's people moved to contain the breach, Lasse had already vanished. Extracted by a quiet human operation that Korlath would not fully understand the scope of until much later. We have a serious problem, Korlath told the small circle of officers who had known about the operation from its inception. A communications technician with direct access to the targeting confirmation logs has disappeared. We do not know what he took or who he gave it to. We assume the worst, said Captain Veshtomen, Korlath's senior aide. We assume the humans have everything. The civilian government still believes this was an accident, Korlath said. If they learn otherwise before we control the narrative, the political consequences will be severe. For all of us. What would you have us do? We cannot unleak what's already leaked. Korlath considered this for a long moment, the calculation he had made 8 months earlier, the one that had seemed so carefully insulated from consequence, now revealing cracks he had not anticipated. We get ahead of it. We commission an independent investigation of our own, one we control, that confirms the original account. A second layer of official narrative, thorough enough to outweigh whatever the humans claim to have. It was, Toman would later reflect, the decision that transformed a contained crisis into a catastrophic one, because it required drawing more officers, more analysts, and more administrative staff into active participation in covering up what had become, with each passing week, an increasingly fragile lie. 8 weeks after the Hippocrates was destroyed, Director Voss presented her completed case not to the Human Security Council alone, but to a specially convened session of the Galactic Conclave, the same body whose Grand Hall had once hosted humanity's chaotic first introduction to galactic society years earlier. It was, by deliberate design, a public proceeding, broadcast across every major species information networks, conducted with a transparency that stood in stark contrast to the Tessari's carefully managed initial response. Honored delegates, Voss began, addressing a hall considerably more attentive than the one that had greeted Captain Jack Harrison's first speech years before. I am not here to ask the conclave to authorize action against the Tessari Compact. I am here to present evidence, and to ask only that this body evaluate that evidence honestly. She walked the assembly through the case methodically, the weapon's signature inconsistent with routine patrol forces, the ambush positioning recorded by relay satellite, the pattern of prior incidents written off without genuine investigation, the intercepted communications placing a special operations vessel at the strike location, and finally, with Lasse's explicit consent and under careful protective protocols that obscured his current location, his first-hand testimony confirming the targeting confirmation request he had personally processed 6 hours before the strike. The Tessari delegation, present at the session as a matter of protocol, watched in visible, mounting distress as each piece of evidence was presented, their diplomatic composure eroding with a thoroughness that mirrored Korlath's unraveling cover-up half a galaxy away. This is fabrication, the lead Tessari delegate insisted, when given opportunity to respond. Manufactured evidence designed to damage Compact standing for reasons the humans have not disclosed. Voss had anticipated this response, and her counter was not anger or escalation, but a final piece of evidence she had deliberately withheld until precisely this moment. "I would direct the conclave's attention to a communication recovered 3 days ago," she said, "intercepted from Tessari internal channels, dated 5 days after our investigation became known to Tessari Command. In it, Fleet Admiral Korlath instructs his senior aide to commission what he describes as a second layer of official narrative." The recording played, Korlath's voice, verified through 3 independent forensic audio analyses, instructing Tolman in exactly the words Voss had quoted. The Tessari delegation's protests died in the silence that followed. The fallout within the Tessari Compact's own government, once Korlath's operation became impossible to deny, exceeded anything human intelligence had projected. The civilian leadership, genuinely unaware of Korlath's actions and genuinely horrified upon learning the full extent of what had been concealed from them, moved within days to remove him from command and open a full civilian investigation, one conducted with a transparency the military's prior cover-up made politically unavoidable. Korlath himself was taken into compact custody 11 days after Voss's conclave presentation, his defense, offered during preliminary proceedings, resting entirely on his belief that human expansion represented a threat justifying extraordinary measures he insisted his civilian government had been too cautious to authorize through legitimate channels. "I did what was necessary to protect the compact," he stated, "from a species whose capabilities and intentions remain poorly understood by people who have never had to plan for the worst case." Prime Minister Hesse, addressing both the Tessari public and, by extension, the Human Coalition government in a broadcast carried across both networks, offered an apology that bore none of the careful hedging of the Compact's original statement. "What was done to the crew and patients of the Hippocrates was not an accident," Droll said. "It was a deliberate act of violence, concealed through deliberate deception, carried out by officers who believed they answered to no authority beyond their own judgment of necessity. This government failed in its most basic responsibility, to know what was being done in its name, and I will not insult the memory of 412 people by pretending otherwise." President Bello received Droll's broadcast with a complicated mixture of vindication and grief that Voss recognized in her own reaction, the particular weight of being proven entirely correct about something that should never have needed proving at all. "They're offering full reparations, complete transparency into the investigation, and a formal restructuring of compact military oversight to prevent recurrence," Bello said, reviewing the formal response that had arrived alongside Droll's broadcast. "It's more than I expected, this quickly. It's what's required to rebuild any trust at all," Voss said. "And I think, for what it's worth, Prime Minister Droll means it. She wasn't part of the deception. I believe her horror at discovering it was genuine." "What do you recommend our response be?" Voss had thought carefully about this question throughout the investigation, aware that the choice humanity made now would shape how every species watching this proceeding understood not just the Hippocrates incident, but humanity's character more broadly. "I recommend we accept the reparations, support the Compact's restructuring efforts, and decline any further punitive action beyond what their own justice system pursues against Korlath and his co-conspirators," Voss said. "We built this case on the principle that truth, presented honestly and patiently, would be sufficient. I think it would undermine that principle if we now demanded more than truth and accountability can provide." Bello considered this for a long moment. Some in the council will want a harder response, a message that this cannot happen again without serious cost to the Compact as a whole. "The message has already been sent," Voss said. "Every species in this region watched a regional power's military leadership try to murder humanitarian workers and lie about it, and watched that lie collapse completely under patient, honest investigation. I think that message will outlast anything we could add to it through punishment." 1 year after the Hippocrates was destroyed, a new humanitarian protocol bearing the ship's name had been adopted by the Galactic Conclave, establishing independent, multi-species verification standards for hospital ship operations along contested borders, standards proposed jointly by human and Tessari delegations working together for the first time since the crisis began. Vren Lhasa, granted asylum on Earth, and now working with the Coalition's intelligence services in an advisory capacity, attended the protocol's formal adoption ceremony at the conclave, seated beside Director Voss in the same hall where his testimony had first been presented to the galaxy. "I still think about what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet," Lassa told Voss, watching the ceremony from the gallery. "If I'd convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility to say anything." "You didn't stay quiet," Voss said. "That's what matters now. Do you think they would have believed me if it had just been my word? No corroborating evidence, no pattern analysis, nothing but one technician's claim against an entire empire's official account." Voss considered the question honestly, the way she tried to consider every question Lassa asked her, aware of how much courage his initial message had required, and how much he deserved a truthful answer rather than a comfortable one. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think it would have been harder. I think the case would have been weaker without everything else we built around it. But I also think your willingness to risk everything you had, when you believed silence was wrong, is the reason any of the rest of it was possible to build at all. The evidence proved what happened. You proved that someone inside the system that did it still believed. Truth mattered more than loyalty to people who'd abandoned it." The Hippocrates Protocol ceremony concluded with a moment of silence for the 412 people the original ship had carried, observed simultaneously across every species network feed. A galaxy-wide stillness that Director Voss found, watching it from the gallery beside the man whose courage had made the truth undeniable, more powerful than any military response could have been. What the Hippocrates incident ultimately taught the wider galaxy was not a lesson delivered through force, because humanity had deliberately chosen not to deliver it that way. It was a lesson about what patient, rigorous honesty could accomplish against even a carefully constructed lie, and a quiet reminder that the species once dismissed as primitive and impulsive had, in its sharpest moment of grief and provocation, chosen the harder path of proof over the easier path of vengeance, and had been vindicated for making that choice.